Death is the only thing that sustains life. Everything that we're aware of that we call nature, except for ourselves and our domestic animals, kills for living. Even if it's an herbivore, it doesn't matter. If you eat a plant, it still dies. And like, it's funny to think that plants are not sessile or that they have no feeling. It's like, plants are incredibly intelligent, and the microorganisms that you're disturbing when you kill a plant is upon the millions. And so it's like, how we weigh life is just kind of, I don't know, interesting to me. You see that finch right there? I don't know if you can, he was popping around these sunflowers, but yeah, he saw him. Reed was one plant down here that took over everything. But since we removed the reed and we were caught with winter runoff, the winter water came while we were doing our work essentially, and it really halted us, and it was a very eye-opening process. It felt very negligible for me to have created such a vulnerability on the bank. We put so much forethought into that. We planned and we acted and everything like that, but hindsight's 20/20, and it's just not a gift anybody I'm aware of has on the front end. More than likely, this is the white sweet clover that's already kind of like vegged out. This Johnson grass right here. So like there's a good amount of plants that I did know before doing this reed removal. Once I've done this reed removal though, now I've cataloged 86 plants, but I believe I had even a couple more. 86 new species, new genus species of plants that were down here now. To be a steward of nature, as people say, you've got to observe nature. To like just sit and watch what is nature doing, you start to learn a lot. Like these sunflower seed heads that are all dried out right here like this have been picked by the finch. Nature is systems, and sustainability of those systems involves systems members. You can't be the overseer of every system. You put one seed down, this one plant, this one seed that was one plant turned into all of these seed heads that have who knows how many countless seeds in each head that the finch will eat. And that's great. I'm like, yeah, we love feeding the birds. For me, the cool thing is I know they're gonna drop seeds, and they're not the type of birds that go to the ground to pick up seeds. Also, the ones that do are not likely to get them all. So my point, all these are volunteer sunflowers within, a couple of seasons, because that whole idea of live and let live, let something do work for you. And that's my whole point, is I don't have people around here to help me. I'm one guy on just under 2 acres. I've got my family, but like, if it needs lifting or pushing or screwing or that's me. So I've got to find streamlined ways to keep my time, which is my most precious resource, is time with my family, with anything. I've got to find a way to get that. And so to me, it's partnering with systems. And, the finch is a system, we'll call it that. We knew that the lure was the creek, right? It's kind of one of those, like, it's the bait to get people here. I've always loved Oak Creek. When I lived in Phoenix, I would come up for water day trips. We'd hit a local water hole, and Oak Creek is just absolutely one of my favorite bodies of water in Arizona. If not my favorite, I think it is possibly, but, and I may be biased at this point, but it's one of Arizona's only perennial watersheds. It's what's really cool is you can drive up to Flag and you can see where it starts, and it's not even a creek yet. You drive a mile or two down, you start to see the flow, drive a mile or two more, and you start to see more water going and white water. It's just really cool to see how this just emerges and is perpetually flowing. It's not wasteful. No one's running the water. No one forgot to turn it off. It's really mind-blowing when you think about it and the amount of life that it supports. I often see beaver and otter right here in this little section. We have fish in this creek all the time, like bass. There's carp. I mean, mostly the fish people don't want, unfortunately, but also introduced, so what are you gonna do? This is really where I see all of the things that I've studied with gardening and farming. This is how I see it in real time, nature's way. The saying for me, soil is formed through transportation. And essentially when you do get storm runoff or when you get the rain, like this creek also deposits tons of sand, silt, and clay. That is the geometric combination of what is soil. But to me, soil is only really soil when you've got also microorganisms in there. Otherwise it's dirt. A few weeks ago, the water came up. And so like you see this pile right here, this just kind of shoved up there like that. It looks like it drifted against these reeds. It did. The water only came up a couple feet, but came up enough to like start moving some of my little debris that I was bordering the path with and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to see it now, but it's funny because I noticed this stuff right away. This is clay. We've all seen, shots of clay like this, right? It's like, if you ask anyone, hey, what kind of soil is this? Probably someone's gonna say clay. right? They see it all cracked apart. But if you look at it, it is this thin deposit. It just deposited right on top of the soil. It's like right on top of the sand or the silt or the clay or whatever was there. And next year it's gonna do it again. And next year gonna do it again. And then, so soil builds in horizons. On a non-stream bed, you're in a forest, the leaf litter, they fall, something eats it, it builds up humic soil or soil organic matter, more leaves fall. It's that constant process of building and layering that is soil formation. So my whole philosophy on how to grow is how the cottonwood grows. That diagonal tree going up there, the big one, it was our only cottonwood until I got rid of the reed. Again, you and I are standing where there would have been reed. We could not have stood here before. It would have been absolutely impossible. But now, you look at these, I've got all these cottonwood trees growing right here. Are they all gonna make it? No, probably we'll see what winter runoff does to some of them. These are my beans. There's a lot of them all over. For whatever reason, they do really well in just this path. I don't water them. It may be a quote invasive species on the creek or whatever. It's not gonna take anything over. I keep intentionally between the paths these wild chunks of like diverse plant populations and some seeded plants that I'm, let that mulch and reseed. And so, but it's important to keep these wild sections, if you will. I threw so many different seeds down there. It would be fun to actually go in there and see like what is growing that I can't see from here. But again, more clay, right? This water runs over and it just deposits layers. And stuff does get washed away too. So part of the process could be like 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes. Put it this way, this soil right here is vulnerable because nothing is locking it in. But any deposits that are in here are gonna be much more secure because it's like, it's a comb, frankly, right? It's gonna catch things. It's going to lock it in. The roots are locking stuff in. I'll have grass in the paths where I can just kind of weed eat and make it approachable versus having to come through and pull out plants that are like, rooted in the system. Wild and approachable is like the balance we're going for here. I can yammer, man. I wanna talk about the soil building more than necessarily the individual plants and stuff that are going on down here. Careful of the gopher holes. You would just be walking and all of a sudden you sink into a hole. They say the farmer's shadow is one of the best fertilizers, right? Sometimes I'm a horrible farmer's shadow just because I'm like so hands off with certain things. Like sometimes you just get out of the way and let it do its thing, But then I'll come back a week or two later, I'm like, oh, look at this leek. Hadn't seen that one. The birds are going pretty nicely in here right now. So we're calling this the berry bed, the goji berry, the blackberries, but what I'm pointing out right now is the arugula. Any of these little arugulas you see right here, these are volunteer, including right back here, all of these arugulas. Arugula is one of those ones, I call it like a zombie plant. We want plants that are like gonna reseed in the zombie apocalypse, ones that we want to eat, right? So arugula is a great one. You really, once you get a seed going, if you let it, you can't stop it. It's gonna take over. There's so many plants that are going to showcase what I'm saying and the whole idea of ecology versus economy. This took one seed, right? With all things going right. Like of course I planted a tray and like there might have been some that didn't come in, but this is one seed to make this one plant, right? Crush open a berry. This is a tomato. I don't know how many seeds we've got in here. It's gonna be hard because they're sticky, but we'll say at least 10, I'm saying, probably. So, and these chia seeds. Seeds are abundant, right? And that's the whole point of what I'm getting at is there's probably 10 seeds or so here. One seed made this plant and you got, I don't know how many berries with how many seeds. I mean, do the math. And that's the same thing going on here with the sunflowers. The finch that was here just a moment ago picking at this one, you can see is pretty well picked out. And it just leaves this little puffy shell. But there's my point right there. They didn't get them all. And so I guarantee there's gonna be volunteer sunflowers next year. With my assistance, of course, too, because what am I doing? I'm chopping and dropping them in places that I want them to be. A lot of these were in the garden this year. Where you see all this mulch right here going basically all this way is just like the bare ground there, which I try really hard in the field to keep the soil covered regardless of what it is covering it. I don't care if it's Bermuda grass, even in the field, that's good right now. But organic matter in the form mostly of mulch, but like then you get plants that like this was cover crop and or some weeds that got a little out of control, too big to chop and drop, and so I placed them here.
As an independent team of filmmakers, we love producing documentaries for artisans of all trades, honoring skill, passion, and determination. So whether you're a garage baker, homegrown mycologist, backyard farmer, or off-grid homesteader, send us a message and share your story with the world.
This is essentially going to be another garden at some point. I mean, it already is by certain standards. So I know this looks crazy, it's really dry, but now here's cardboard, right? That, like you hear that, that's cardboard. And if I move under the cardboard, this is dirt. It doesn't look like much, but for me to be able to do that right there is different than if I was able to do that over there. What little microorganisms are working on this, and add water to this, add a little water, a monsoon or whatever, things start coming alive. I did a dry corn patch here this year. It wasn't what I would fully call successful, but to me it's indicative of the process starting, of how whenever you have a patch of dirt that you're trying to make it a garden, you've got to invite life, right? And so that starts a lot of times with organic matter, like carbon, right? It is the source of all of it, the carbon. So put that on the ground, let the microorganisms start working on it. If it's something that you can put seeds on, start with cover crop, because that's really, to me, the best way to build soil is getting that profile building underground and above ground. You're growing biomass, you chop that biomass, it becomes food and fodder for like microorganisms and other things like that. Essentially building the soil, and it doesn't always look pretty, right? But again, I'm not trying to manage everything, every single process. I'm letting processes be. The wind has run through these sunflowers like crazy, so I'm trying to push them back so they don't drop in the garden again. But I also want to prolong the process as long as possible. The birds are still harvesting, so I'm still inviting them to the garden. This is still a source of food and life for them. And so it's important to me to continue that as long as I can until it becomes a problem for our end too, right? And it's like, you gotta be honest with that process. If it's something that's hard for you, then how are you going to be the thing that maintains the thing next year? You have to engage, you have to play and understand like, okay, I am part of this. These wouldn't be here if I didn't allow them to be here. It's humbling sometimes to realize that you are beholden to a system that's bigger, and also you're the keeper of it in a way. What I was gonna try to show you again was this arugula plant. Arugula is one of my favorite. You can stay there. I'm gonna trudge through here real quick, because I know I've got one back here. Oh, here we go. I've got a bunch of them back here, but I'll take one. This is what I would actually call a small arugula plant. Every year I'll take the plants when they're like big like this, and I just throw them somewhere. Like in the case last year, I threw them over there, and they densely plant themselves. One of my favorite questions to ask little kids, like first grade gardens and stuff like that, was like, how many seeds did it take to make this one plant? And you'd get a bunch of little answers, right? Like, and then I'm like, how many seeds did it take to make this one plant? And then finally some kids like, one! And I'm like, yes, one! And then so we go and we take a pod, right? I mean, these again, like, to be fair, have been really stripped already. Like, it's been over there for months already dried out like this. So it's not even gonna showcase exactly what I'm trying to show, but it is already. Like, look at each of these pods. It took one seed to make a pod. And again, I've seen way better examples. Like if you leave, like that one, if I leave it to be a seed plant, it's gonna be twice this size. This was just crowded in with other plants, and so that's what you get. For instance, yeah, I want arugula right there, right? I'll let it, and I'll walk on it. It's gonna break the seeds and disperse them, but, so here's one pod from one of the branches that we'll say eat say 10 branches on there, 10 pods per branch, maybe. That's like low numbers, but I'd say we're pushing almost 20 seeds there. Someone can count it if they really want, but that's what I'm saying. For some reason, our culture, mother culture, and I'm not saying humans, because there are tribes out there still living that are not drinking our Kool-Aid. They're still very much plugged in with the natural cycle. They're still very much part of it, big and small. Our culture, ranging the entire globe, has created this idea of scarcity when it comes to food and security. And it's like, I've never been had by it for some reason. It took me a long time to articulate it, but I've always kind of been like, the gig's up. You can't convince me. And for some reason, and maybe it's because when I was a little kid, you'd find me in the dirt, in the forest, playing, I don't know, but you can't convince me that the birds are gonna have enough food and I'm not. or that it's what we do is so crazy to me, how we look at certain food plants and then the others are not. Nature's not scarce. Nature is incredibly abundant. It is our own design that has created scarcity, or the illusion of scarcity, because frankly, it's not. Again, I could look at this one right here. This is just a cowpea cover crop plant. Just look, it's hanging with beans, and each of these beans, here you go, here's one that's almost done, so I'm not too upset with it, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in just this one pod. So, prove me wrong. You know, that's all. I just think that's what I'm trying to plug into, is how do we get to be a part of this system where it's like, again, one seed. You have any idea how many seeds are gonna come from this one seed? Insane. And this is a volunteer also, by the way. So a lot of the plants in here, we've let reseed and volunteer, and that is my favorite type of garden. And certain plants like these tomatoes, right, of course I'm cultivating, but my heart tells me one year I'll have volunteer cherry tomatoes in the field, right? I just have to build the soil hierarchy, build the presence of everything that I'm trying to get in the garden to that space. Observation's the key to all of it, but I can't just sit around for 4 years observing. That's just not feasible, right? People ask me all the time how to blah, 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 right? And the thing is, if you know what it is you want, or what it is, and the why, those are the only things you need to know. How is a inhibitory question that for some reason we always put at the front end of something. It's like, how do we garden? What do you want to grow and why? If you know those things, if you know the what and the why, the how becomes part of the story. It is no longer an inhibiting question, and I'm just gonna say that about everything. The power in that is if you're able to learn from your own observations so that you can make adaptations. But if all you're ever doing is just going along at head speed and doing whatever, you're gonna get in your own way. You're not gonna see things like the finch because this ugly bed was done a long time ago, let's get rid of it and put them in the compost. Like, you know, to each their own, that's fine. But to me, my favorite workshops are seed-saving workshops. There's no other way to show abundance. It just is amazing. It's astounding to me. So again, like tomatoes, you get a plant that has a bunch of tomatoes on it, crush them open, seeds, right? It's like, you guys, my whole thing is I want to show you 5 different ways to grow lettuce. There's not one way to grow lettuce. I'll show you the ways I build all of my beds, but I want lettuce growing all out there, just reseeding on its own. Most of my favorite plants should be aggressively reseeding on their own. The idea that we have to do so much in our garden is just, it's silly to me. That's the other thing, is I try to show people what I don't do. You know, it's like I let systems take over, and sometimes it's pretty, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's more abundant in ways than the ways that you don't want, and less in ways that you do, and things like that. But it's all part of it, and really there's no bad plants. Like I said, it's all biomass at the end of the day. And that's the really cool thing about the reed down there. Depending on where it's at in its cycle, when it's nice and tall and green like it was down there, if you chip it, this is our burn pile. There's some weeds that, right, I just don't want to even chance them coming back through a compost. I don't thermophilically compost, so there's stuff that I burn, and that organic matter is gonna then get spread out on a field, and it is what it is. We try not to burn much, we try to chip what we can, but again, you have to be realistic. Like when there's so much, I mean, you look around, there's so much wood, and this is just from this year, from the trees down there, so I can only chip so much, and if I chip, now I'm using fossil fuels, right? So like, there's pros and cons to every practice, and it's just like, if you can identify them, make your own decision. I'm not here to tell you what's better or worse, but I'm just saying what works for me. Releasing carbon into the atmosphere from burning, not so good, but I'm gonna plant plants to try to offset that, and I have tons of mulch that I'm putting on the ground to sequester carbon, but all we can do is try. And so here, check out this mulch though. It's funny, I like geek on mulch so hard. Before we ever moved here, it's so cool that this property reflects things that, you know, when COVID happened, like probably a lot of people, I was on the couch more hours than I wanted to be, like researching things or doing stuff. And like, one of the things I was researching was like homesteading with bamboo and stuff. And somebody's position was like, every homestead should have bamboo. And like, whatever, dude, you're weird. He was saying like, it produces the most biomass in a given time. How much did it produce? Those plants, how they stack so close together, they shoot 30 feet in the air, and when you chip them when they're fresh, it makes this really nice straw in a sense, right? So I can spread this, it's a grass on the field as a straw, or wherever I need to put biomass down. When it gets to its harder, like woodier phase that it'll get to in the wintertime and you chip that, this becomes more like what you would think a traditional mulch. This will break down and become soil very quickly, right? Like it's delicate, and this is more coarse, and probably, if I had to guess, it might have some lignin component to it or whatever, but it's a more complex carbon. We can say that almost assuredly because it's just harder. It's gonna take a while for this to break down. Different microorganisms are likely to work on this than this, even like some might, you know, do both, but my point is I got two products from the same plant. Does it belong on the entire bank like that? No, this is my opinion. You know, we removed it, which again, that was a heartache in the whole process. Like there were pros and cons to that, very much. To say now that I've cataloged over 86 plants, that's amazing to me. There's a lot of edible plants down there. The wild mint is probably one of our favorite, which is just mind-blowing, the menthol that comes out of that. This pine tree, it's interesting that it's there. And it's funny that it's such a driving force in the garden because they're conifers, and so they support a different microorganism in the ground, right? A pine forest is more likely to support a fungal soil mass. It's not likely to have as many worms in it. Woody stems generally prefer a more fungally dominant soil. It affects the breakdown process, and it leads to a more acidic soil. Things with greens are gonna generally support a more bacterially dominant soil. It's simplistic, it's like you can think of it like that pile of straw over there. You got baby food or steak. Ultimately, you're always gonna have both, but it's like I said, dominance. And so it's funny to have a pine tree right next to a garden that would essentially be very alkalizing native soil, that thing's working to acidify the soil. I'm sure if you ever hiked a pine forest, that duff layer is allowed to build up and just build up, and you can, you know, dig a pine tree underneath for, you know, a foot or so before finding the soil sometimes. But what you won't find are earthworms or roly-polies. You're not gonna find arthropods. You're not gonna find macrobiology in that regard, breaking it down. It's definitely the microorganisms. And that's something I didn't realize a long time ago. There's no one good, right? What's good for this isn't necessarily good for that. And so on that note, worms, on a non-dry day, if we had just gotten rain, you will see worm castings everywhere on this soil, everywhere on this whole property. It's insane what they do. These mulberry, when they drop leaves, there won't be a single leaf left months after they're all done. It's like the worms eat it all. They're aggressive processors of organic matter. The worms are the big driver for us in the garden space. Sometime in 2021, I believe it was like February of 21, I was on Instagram looking at some like regenerative pages for indoor gardens, and I came across Avocado Tech. Blue of Green Tank is his handle. Shout out to Tyler, super cool dude. I'm really happy that he helped me get on my journey where I'm at. I was like, you know, I'm looking at these pages and all of a sudden it's like, you're looking at someone's indoor grow bed and they flip over an avocado and there's like 100 worms, just like, whoa, what is going on there? And I already know in my mind, worms are like it, in a sense. Like they are in an applicable growing situation. Their castings are incredibly nutrient dense. They have a ton of calcium. The worm casting is incredible. What comes out is not what came in. It is a supercharged form. And of course, what went in matters what comes out. So I'm not gonna say like, you know, it's not Rumpelstiltskin here, but yes, in a sense, what they are doing is incredible upcycling. So I'm like, whoa, what is going on, man? You have worms in your indoor bed? Like, tell me more. We hashed out some conversation, which was amazing. I was like, so dude, I wanna do this. Like, tell me, you know, he's like, well, if I had to do it again, I would reach out and I would do it like Leighton Morrison's Soil Horizon system. And I was like, okay, cool. So it sent me down another rabbit hole, and here, check this out. I've been studying soil formation for over a decade. The part that we're focusing on here, EAO, these horizons. When you talk about soil layers, they're called horizons. The horizon that most people focus on, like a potted plant or whatever, is this O horizon, right? That's your organic matter. I don't even know if that's actually what it stands for because the others have no like real acronyms. That's alluvial layer, but who knows what A stands for? Just a horizon. People focus on that O horizon, right? Like if you were to say, you know, make this a garden bed, people would fill it with potting soil or compost or something alike, right? Like it would just be like this rich, fluffy stuff. But in my gardens, everything you see in here, including pots that I've done it in pots this small, like little 1 gallon pots. Just like on the creek, you notice rocks, right? Bedrock. That really is what we call parent material. And this is a more typical soil profile of somewhere like the Midwest, where you've got really deep soil profiles and stuff like that. You get to a bedrock layer, or what they call parent material. But in this instance, this represents like gravel. It's being broken down in a way, but it's gravel and sand. So in all of the beds in here, so this bed, this 4 foot by 12 foot bed, this one bed here, all of these pots, those pots, everything in here starts with horizons. It goes in a ratio too, so before I get too carried away, when you're setting up these beds, the ratio goes 1, 2, 4. So one would be your E, 2 your A, and 4 your O when you're setting it up. So the E is coarse gravel and coarse sand, colorful as you can. So always diversity, right? Sand and gravel, and you just kind of put them together. It's not more complex than that. The A is where it's a little complex, and this is what makes this whole system work. The A has to have clay. You gotta have clay in the A. The A horizon is that mineral, right? Like these are obviously minerals, and microorganisms will break them down after time, but much more like weather and things like that are usually what's gonna break them down in nature. But this is what we would otherwise call our native soil. It's got the sand, silt, and clay. Like that is what, again, soil scientists classify soil as different levels of sand, silt, clay. And like, so we're starting to learn like, okay, there's biology involved, what does that do? But the sand, silt, and clay in here is what makes it go. Surface area generally in agricultural clays is negatively charged, which, like a magnet, negatively charged things is attracting positively charged things like calcium, nitrogen, all the cations that we have in the soil, the food, sodium particle, whatever that cation is that the plant needs at the time, it helps it to hold on to the soil without being leached away from water, right? It like helps hold it into the soil rhizosphere until something can work on it. And so clay is really important in that regard alone, that it's the magnet of the soil chemistry. That's the A. It's incredibly important. And then the O, we're getting to what most people put in their soils, right? Potting soils and things like that. If we're doing inside plants or like house plants, occasionally we'll buy a bag of potting soil, organic potting soil. But if and when I buy a bag of potting soil, I'm gonna tell everybody this, just because again, I think we do things sometimes not knowing, and we just have to just go down that path. Peat moss is in nearly every bag of potting soil everywhere on the planet. And I'm not gonna go on a huge campaign here, but like we should stop harvesting peat. We should stop buying bags of soil that have peat in it. There are other bags out there, pit moss, pit moss. I love pit moss. We've done so much work with pit moss. What that is essentially recycled cardboard, paper, and bark that is inert like peat moss is. It's a replaceable, replenishable. It's at least a step toward the right way, like of getting people thinking like, these peat bogs took millions of years to form. They're a water filtration system, they're a carbon sequestration system, we cannot replace it in our lifetime. We should stop doing things like that, for instance, right? That's not me saying like, stop doing that. Like, I've used plenty of bags with peat in it before I knew better. Once I figured it out, this is really bad. And there's also people out here trying to help us shortcome these gaps. Let's support them. So in Arizona Worm Farm, I don't know if you got down there, they were a source for me to buy my initial peat moss or pit moss. I got it through them initially, and then I started working with pit moss. But I used to not have any perlite in this bed at all, right? This was just like organic matter that I built up. I'm not saying perlite's bad or that it's bad for your soil. Like if you have a bag of potting soil, use it. But use it over and over and over and over. Don't ever throw it away. It doesn't become bad. Like, let's use that peat to its fullest extent now that we've got it. So these beds are full of like I said, 1, 2, 4 when I started. So when I started, they were absolutely full with the organic matter to the top. I have not, these are sweet potato vines. And this is an avocado from when I was doing my avocado tech, but I haven't amended these. The soil breaking down and doing its thing. And like, so if you look at all of this is worm castings. The entire thing is worm castings. And I try not to dig in here too much because I'm gonna find worms and roots like that. And like, I understand like even right here, there's millions of microorganisms in my hand right now, millions. And not even there's possibly hundreds of different kinds, if not thousands of different kinds. Like that's how much life is in soil that it just goes unthought of a lot of times. I don't use fertilizer, right? I don't do any of that stuff. What I'm constantly doing is, this is some natural breakdown process in varying stages, and that is the food for the things that are living in this bed that are creating the microorganisms, right? Like, who's feeding the cottonwood tree down by the creek? Who's tilling that soil? Who's checking the pH? Who's doing all that? Nobody's doing all that. And so how are you gonna tell me that to grow something smaller with less demand, I have to do all that? It's ridiculous to think about. It's preposterous. So I'm constantly proving, to me, I'm constantly validating that nature does have a design. We are a part of it, we can integrate, and it is fully supporting what we do. Everything in here, again, when I set this bed up, the bottom of this was just coarse gravel and coarse sand, right? Like the hole probably to right here. Then I put my native soil to here, and then I filled up the last. So this was full all the way to the top of the potting soil when it started. But if you look at it now, I'm all the way down here, right? And like, I mean, you have to move through the strawberries and the oat straw from earlier, like lots of stuff. But look at that, roly-poly's going crazy right there. And then all this right here, that's worm castings, all of this. So it's like, why even add worm castings? Why would I add worm castings? Why would I create an infrastructure? I don't need to, right? Just put the elements in place and let the systems do what they're supposed to do. So yeah, these little worms, I don't want to be mean to the little worm, but that's the guy right there, one of them. This is likely a red wiggler. There's possibly others in here, but red wigglers are a type of earthworm. Earthworms, that's like the general category of worms in general that we like. There's, I think, over 7,000 species of worm or whatever, but earthworms in general, so night crawlers, red wigglers, those are all earthworms, but they're different. And so in this bed that is open to the bottom of the ground, right? Like it's open, the worms can come and go if they really wanted. Red wigglers, what they do, or any of those composting worms, they stay on the surface. They might go a couple inches down, but I haven't even ever seen them that deep. They're surface litter worms. And so they're constantly going to be just working on and breaking down that organic matter, but they're also eating the microorganisms in the soil that have been breaking down that organic matter. Once they poop them out, it's like ripping open a bag of fertilizer. That's the other teeming with microbes says that, and I love that analogy as well. But it's like, so now it's plant available because here's this dead microbe that had already taken and worked and made the nitrogen available and things like that. The cycle goes on. In this bed, so not this bed right here where it's closed bottom, I would not put an earthworm, a night crawler, because they want to go 10, 12 feet down sometimes, right? It's not fair to put them in something that's not even 18 inches deep. So this one, do I have night crawlers in it? I might have put some in, and like they may or may not come and go, but primarily what I'm working on in here is the red wigglers. They're breaking down the organic matter, and again, they're upcycling it, right? I'm very pro diversity. So like I have stuff where like, I know I had thrips working on these leaves earlier. I've had whiteflies, I've had spider mites before. If you can find something to eat your problem, that's usually a better way to go. But I just invite things like regular spiders, like orb spider, like spiders, not spider mites. These guys, they're all in here working. Like not many flying insects work in this garden when you have a ton of spiders. So they help keep my pest control to a minimum. If I don't have to measure pH, if I don't have to fertilize, what I'm constantly doing is undoing all the stuff that people do. And so it's not a bragging point for me. What it is a bragging point on the abundance and the inherent ability of nature if we show up with it in tandem or in symbiosis rather than like fighting it. The cottonwood is gonna grow forever and ever the way it grows. Like all we need to do is biomimicry. That's what it all comes back to me. That word right there, biomimicry. People say I'm regenerative, people say I'm this and that or what. I don't even know what that means, man. I like buzzwords like the next guy, but really it's biomimicry. It's mimicking natural cycles and systems and integrating them into your managed cultivation system. Independence is another illusion that we've created. There's not a single microorganism, there's not a single thing living independently of other things. That's just not. So it's silly to behave that way in a human culture. Reach out to people that are doing things that are inspiring you to ask for help. You don't have to have a raised bed. You don't have to have all these fancy things, or, I mean, not that any of this is fancy, but the system works in that way. And again, the only reason I'm doing this and the reason this shirt exists, I have soil properties books, ecology books, biology books. I can tell you this is how soil forms. It's called fall. You know, when every year in a place that we have fall, right? Arizona's a weird, like sometimes, depending, those leaves fall on the ground. And that process is started when something, right? Like the photosynthesis, it's everything is green right now. But when it starts to translocate those sugars, right? When it's taking all that energy that it sent up from the ground into those leaves, and now it's taking them back into its root system and putting them into the microorganisms for food for the winter and dropping that on the ground like a blanket. It's huge. It's everything. And when we undo any of that, like we joked about this, Midwest guys, we grew up raking the leaves and putting them in those bags from Ace that we had to buy, and they'd probably tear, and like made awesome leaf piles to jump in. That was fun. But then we'd have to aerate the yard and pay for the fertilizer. And it's like, it's so silly to me when we literally, you know, zooming back out from my childhood, like hashtag leave the leaves. That's it. That's the answer. Leave the leaves. Let the whole process do what it was always going to do. And, you know, sit in your hammock instead. I don't know. Like, it's just, so I just love being a part of a process that is all about abundance. It's absolutely got my back. It's got your back. It's got anybody that wants to show up to do this. And it starts however you want. Like, again, you know, start with a pot. My very first gardens with my, you know, now 16-year-old, 15-year-old, but soon to 16, might as well be, was recycled wood. I was walking around downtown Phoenix, pulling him in his wagon. There were some random 2x4s lying around, and I saw it as an opportunity to build a little raised bed. It was like a 6-inch by 2-foot raised bed on my balcony in downtown Phoenix. So just do it. Whatever you have to do, if you're inspired to it, you know, start with a pot, whatever, get something in your life, because growing is addictive. And it's the addiction we need.
So here's our little vineyard. We're in Arizona wine country. So this was our project, thanks to all the amazing mentors who live in the area who taught us just about this really cool plant and the fact that it can grow here in Arizona. People are always sort of shocked and surprised that Arizona makes wine, but we love wine. And so we planted some Syrah, Mourvedre, and Grenache, this GSM combo, which seems to do really well here. And they say not to baby the vines the first couple of years. So these vines are 3 years old, and we've really just let them kind of fend for themselves. So they're healthy and they're happy, but they've been, you know, we've gone in and out of different water, in and out of different pruning, but we're enjoying just being in this space. It just feels like it's like you're in another world, in another place. So there's some grapes on them right now, but we won't harvest and make wine for another year or two, and maybe we'll just have a lot of red wine vinegar that first year, and that's okay too. It's a learning for us. We've got 10 of each, which should yield about 150 bottles of wine, and we'd love to be able to share those with friends and family and guests who come to stay on our property. We've welcomed over 500 people here just throughout our years.
So that eucalyptus tree was, quotes by our neighbors around us, dead when we moved here, and apparently dead for like 8 years is what we were told. And for the first year or two, we joked that it was like our cheapest farm equipment, because if you know anything about raptors, hawks, and owls, they'll sit up on dead wood because they have an unobstructed vision, right? Like they don't like dense leaves around, they can't see. So they would sit up there perched, and like, I'm like, oh, this is great. They're gonna help us with our gopher problem, etc. But then all of a sudden it started growing again. Like, we had put compost over on that other side, and it's like, what is happening? That tree is very much alive. You can see the bush happening around it, right? The base of it is actually more of a bush, but this branch, I mean, that's got to be 40 feet up, 30 feet at least right there. But we'll harvest these leaves for our potpourri mix. Pretty cool to see something like that that's supposedly been dead for years come back. If you're trying to break up compacted soil, they call it jackhammer radish. It's called like a bunch of names, but daikon radish is this giant white radish. And this is one of them that's been left in the ground. But again, like always going back to my seed example, right? Like this is just one branch, and I mean tons of seed pods on there. So all these, you see these like legs spread out. This one right here too, all of these are radish pods from a daikon radish. So here's one, here's one that's still kind of in the ground, but not really. And here's one that was kind of in the ground. But what I wanted to show you about these, because I mentioned the worms, right? But you're like, okay, cool. So how do you get from A to B? A to B is, this is the radish that was being worked on in the ground. And you know, this other part is still in the ground as now forming soil organic matter to be stabilized. And, you know, it becomes a shell, but where did the things go, right? There, nothing's created nor destroyed, it's transferred. And so the same goes for soil. All that energy is now being transferred into the soil and then maybe back into plant roots, maybe not. Maybe it's being stabilized. Like there's different channels in how it happens, but if it's getting recycled, then so what? Eventually it's going to be sequestered and stabilized, but we need the plant to keep going too. So we need some of it to not be like locked in, like plants need it. It's all about building that soil biology and the profile. So with cover crops, again, here's another cowpea. I just re-sown the winter cover crop for the season. I'll plant a cover crop mix on here. And ideally it will reseed itself like the radish. We haven't gotten here in the vineyard yet, but like this is a cowpea, for example, and there was some flax, I believe, in one of the other rows. It's usually a mix of like, it's a standard mix like a lot of people use, but usually like cowpea, vetch, there's gonna be like probably flax in there, some sort of like millet, like a grass supporting, like, but diversity, because diversity is like, this plant, if you've never heard the word exudates, like think of it as plants' roots are giving off liquid desirables into the soil, and like different microorganisms are attracted to different liquids. That each plant has a different liquid it gives off in its roots, its exudates, and like so that's going to attract a different microorganism and therefore shape the soil profile. So if you have just one plant like a rhododendron, you're obviously going to have a soil profile that's dominated by a certain microorganism over the others. But if you have diversity, then you have, in my opinion and a lot of people's, I don't know if we can say fact yet, a robustness that just can't be matched. And I can anecdotally observe that like time and time again. And people say, you know, in monocultures, that's where you get pest problems. You get them in these too. You get pest problems in in diverse systems as well. It's just one of those things that nature is not as closed looped as us, quote, regenerative growers would like to think it is. And that's like, so we can't be so hard on ourselves thinking that we're creating these perfect cycles. Because I'll tell you what, where's the loop for the deer that comes and eats that plant over there and poops over there? You know what I mean? So like, yes, chop and drop. These closed loop systems are good ideals, but they're also not real. So sorry if I offend anyone, but it's like, you guys know I align with what we're saying. I am about the closed loop, but it's not real. We have to, you can create those, but you still have an input somewhere and you can't be that stringent. That's all I'm saying is like, I at one point went with, you know, absolute no-till. And that's like, I had these learnings about like, oh no, we probably have to pull this route. We have to, you know, you have to be adaptable. It's good to have ideals, obviously, and convictions and be driven by ethics. But at the end of the day, there's balance. Everything has a pro and a con to it. Every practice that I'm aware of has a pro and a con. So that's just been my experience. But this whole building, when we moved here, was the chicken coop. The whole thing, it's like a hotel for chickens. It was insane. Like, what? but the guy we bought the place from, he was very much into upbringing poultry and meat birds. Ours are pets currently that lay eggs. We don't do meat birds yet, but we intend to at some point. But this front half is the outhouse.
This is our poopery that we make with mint, eucalyptus, variety of mulch, and this is what you use. Of course, it's a dry system. It's a dry toilet. We have a bucket, and that's where it all happens. And then you top it off with our
compost toilet. I've never been in an outhouse that smells this good, first of all, and like that. I'm like, I mean, bring me a plate of food, I guess. It's weird, but just saying. But that's the mint from the creek. So the wild mint that we talked about and the eucalyptus, that is what we have, and it helps a system that we want.
It's a way to show just a different system. This is what a compost toilet can be. This is how easy it actually was to do. People ask a lot of questions about it, and it's fun to just engage in those conversations. It's not applicable everywhere, but it works here,
For sure.
and it's fun to show and talk about. And everyone's always surprised at how well the poopery works.
Just to show you again, like this was here when we got here, this was here when we got here, this was here when we got here, this was in the greenhouse, and I used it as a seed table a couple of seasons. But it's about upcycling things. We don't buy everything. Like there's a lot of stuff, even copper, wood, that we reuse. If it's usable, we use it. We're constantly upcycling. We had a metal guy that he did our fence work for us and stuff. I drew him an idea what I needed, and a couple hours later he's like, come pick it up. So you know, we can't do everything alone. Independence, again, that idea, it's silly. It's community all the way, you know. AZ Worm Farm, Tribe Mycelium, Sam, Scott and Ashley will talk about the chicken food. It's just weird and it's cool, but it's the community. The origin of this outhouse was for events. And same with like this kitchen. We've done really, really cool events here with awesome chefs. I think at one point we had 5 Food Network chefs on one event doing something with us, which was super, super cool. So we put together this outdoor kitchen. I mean, it's cool to see chefs setting up here doing stuff, and you got 30, 40 guests or so down there, 50 people, I think is our max at one point. And it's just a really cool space, but that's what this was created of, again, was out of essentially a void or something that we were operating on. It's, you know, and that is creation, is ideas to matter.
The second we set foot on this property, we knew it was to be shared, and that is just a common theme that we've carried through our time here. I mean, it's in our name, it's what we do, it's all about community.
We wanted to get married, and like, obviously, okay, let's use an Airbnb. We don't live up here, so we had our dog, not him at the time, but it was hard to find Airbnbs, one, that allowed dogs, or really even just families in general, kind of, or that support that vibe. And then 2, the event space on the creek to get married or to do something like that, to find a rehearsal dinner spot or any of that. It's just like, wow, what is up with the voids up here? Like, people come up here and there's nowhere to do that. And so that's really what it was for us, was creating an event space that we thought should exist, that we could not have ourselves. When we wanted the Airbnb, it's like, it's hard to find. And so what we've tried to create is what we wanted years ago. Like, say we're playing in the creek and we're muddy, we got our dog and he's muddy or she's muddy, and you can come and leash your dog up and rinse them off, right? Before you go in the casita. And now, so you don't have to walk on dirt. That's why we did this little path. Like, everything is from an experiential problem presented at one point. And it's like, of course the hard floors in there, we can clean and mop, but people feel bad bringing their muddy dog. It's just like, people feel things. So like, let's help have better experience.
See how many eggs we get today, River.
All right, girls.
Hey, babies.
For the chickens and how we are currently using and operating, it's tricky because we do give them the chicken food, you know, that we get from Scott and Ashley, which we love so much. I've had chickens for years, well over 10 years. So it's like, I've seen a lot of chicken foods come down the line. I'm really happy with their product. It's great. Our birds love it. That's what's important. And we get eggs pretty consistently, even winter and summer. So it's cool. The chickens eat a lot of the green. Like, what we're seeing around, it's all matted up because they were eating it and chewing it and doing what the chickens do and poop on it and whatever. But it depends on if they're out of food, like it looks like they are, and out of bedding and stuff like that. But every day or two, come here and I start to call them, like I whistle, like I'm. But I just pull them over to a little fresh patch. You can see they're already starting to scratch and peck at the fresh green. But I call them so I don't run them over, basically, because chickens are smart enough. But, you know, They're not dolphins.
One thing that we noticed is when they were in the coop that was here, it was huge and they like to be really close together. And so they weren't laying very much in there. These were some birds that we brought up with us when we moved here, but then we also got several from neighbors, within months of moving here. And they were laying, but when we built this and moved them in here, I was nervous thinking, oh no, we're taking away they need space. And of course they do, but they started laying within 48 hours. Almost every single bird was laying. So that was just a learning point of like, oh, they actually like to be sort of cuddled. They feed off of each other's hormones. There's a whole method behind it. So yeah, this can fit like up to 18 birds. And it would be fun to just have another one that we can move around and continue to work on the soil. Chickens are an adventure. And people too, sometimes when we think of just being in this space, this, ag space, regenerative space, not everyone has to have chickens and make jam. Like we didn't make jam this year. If you want to, then please, and we'll buy it from you because we didn't make any. But I think that sometimes, you just get in those loops where you see the same thing, and it's really just about, we all have different systems that work for us. I think the point is that we all just show up, right? How we show up is going to be different than how you show up. But if we can hold each other accountable to show up, then we'll have, the diversity in the ways that we're showing up. So if you feel called to have chickens, you'll know how to answer that call because you can't get away from that call. But not everyone hears the same call. We tried to make marshmallows to have for s'mores because we love when guests come and make s'mores. It seems to be a really popular thing. And I've tried like 3 different marshmallow recipes at this point. Marshmallow root is so good for you and it's like relatively, quote, easy to make, but I can't figure it out. So the list of things that we want to do, the goals, sort of this, people always say, oh, the dream, live it. It's like, that's a long list. There's a long list on there. And the things that we are doing and doing well, it changes. The things we're doing well is shorter than, the list of the dream. So it's just fun to be in an encouraging space. There's no pride, there's no judgment. It's just, we're trying things out and we know that everyone else is too. So we don't have room for judgment and pride. We've all just got to move forward and however we can, and it looks really different. So we can certainly inspire each other and spark ideas, but it's not about this like carbon copy of chickens and jam. But one day we'll make some awesome jam and marshmallows.
We're not all gonna do the same things, but last night I mentioned a friend of ours. He emailed me and was like, I've got this, and this year, and I'm like, cool, we didn't get any of those. And he's like, they're filling the void from peaches and pears, and I'm like, hey man, I've got a lot of peaches. A lot of peaches. We froze over 44 pounds of white peaches this year, which is amazing. That was with the pits removed and the skins. That's 45 pounds of peach halves, which is amazing. And then just based on my philosophies and principles, there's at least 45 on the ground, and probably we gave away another 20, I would bet. So that tree was absolutely hanging this year. But it just is one of those things, we'll trade him some fruits. Like, hey man, I've got peaches and maybe some pears. Pears were a little lower this year, but for pomegranates and olives and something else. He had a great year with some of the stuff that we just don't have or didn't have. So it's good, that's community, That's chickens. I was gonna say, I should give them some food though while I'm at it. They're probably like, what's going on, man? You didn't give us the food. This is not a very high-tech feeder, but same with their water. This water, actually, I got the idea when I was working at Riba Farms still. 3-inch PVC pipe, I believe that is. And you just put a float valve in it so that hose is on, which there's a little leak to it and that's fine, but it's actually watering. Like I said, they kick this seed around and it ends up watering and growing little patches of wheatgrass and stuff like that, like around. The chicken food will then be, in the ground ready to grow for them in a green plant form. So I don't mind a little trickle. Also, we're really fortunate. Our garden well, that is this water here, is 30 feet deep, right? That water is down there. It's just one of those so it's feeding the water table at the end of the day. I'm not gonna bother about little bitty drips that are actually more beneficial in the way that I discovered that as a benefit to us. We get hard freezes in the winter. So for me, for the first couple years, that meant turn the water off, which sucks. I don't want to turn the water off in the winter on the outside. This little drip right here has allowed me to keep the water running for the winter time, which is kind of cool, like to think about it that way. So, oh, no, let's go back in, Fluff. There we go. That's Fluff. That's Scott and Ashley's food. Well, Oak Creek organic feed, we love it, but it's seeds. You know, that's what's really cool about this is, I know there's pelletized chicken food, but to me it's like, that's only, anything that does one thing is not cool. It needs to be multifunctional for me to really vibe with it. I can let this chicken food splash on the ground, the ants carry some, the squirrel, it's all seeds. I know I hit on amaranth earlier, but that was the other thing is the chickens like it, right? If they eat it, I'm okay with it. Like I said, in the field, when they eat it and mow it down, it becomes, like I said, a profile where like, look at how many tops there are on this thing. And if they're gonna eat it, fine, cool, that's okay with me. I just have to make sure when I check it at certain boundaries, right? It's like, I don't want it to take over the property, so it involves a little handwork. We love our birds and they love us, I think.
All these cosmos just came up from volunteers from last year. We didn't plant any cosmo seeds this year. Flowers brings me so much joy. So this seems to be the area where I find myself doing the most research and finding cool seed purveyors and different varieties of seeds. But cosmos seem to do really well here and they're so happy. And these were all reseeded from last year. These are our carrots that bolted. I think they just look so lacy. Like they almost look like a Queen Anne's lace and they smell amazing. So I'm always cutting and throwing these. We grow a certain amount of carrots every year that we want to bolt because I just love the way that they create their flowers. And they see it in a vase and say, what flower is that? I'm like, it's a carrot.
If you want a typical vegetable garden that you'd like to then acclimate to your area, you start by saving seeds. Plants are outbreeding, right? And so like if you want to save seeds from amaranth, I wouldn't just take this one. I would take a few that have, you know, had that ability to cross, and you start building a robust population that way. Acclimating a seed to your environment, saving that seed, planting is gold, pure gold. If we were to count the species in this bed, let's just say here's some green onions, which you can plant green onions from seed. I came and got a lot of the flower tops off of these just to throw elsewhere and have green onions growing wherever, right? Because that's cool, why not? But these are usually from a bunch. Like if you buy a bunch of green onions and you usually just use the onion part, and like a lot of people hopefully don't throw it away, but will throw that bottom part away. And literally if you put it in a glass of water, you can within an hour see it growing again. It's just amazing. We tried to do baby corn this year. You're supposed to harvest this, I guess, 5 days after the silks appear. And I didn't read that. I was like, oh, I waited till about 11 days, huh? And I don't know what variety necessarily everything is because I've taken to just plant the seeds. Just plant the seeds. And we do try to plant with the moon cycle, as weird as that sounds. Like, put the seed in the ground. Just get it in the ground, get that thing going. So like sometimes I'll prioritize putting a seed in the ground when I have other work to do, because now I'm like, okay, well, at least while I'm doing this work, this is doing its work too. So these tomatoes, they'll probably do a nice little crop right before they go, like we hit a hard freeze. It's gonna be funny, but that's just how I've noticed things go around here. It took a little while from growing in Phoenix for 10 years to adapting to like an honest one cycle thing. We got like everything, moringas up in here, little kales, like it's just, you just put stuff places and see what does well and like adapt. We've already got this rosemary here. There's some sage tucked in the corner there. These onions are more or less, they're perennial the way we treat them. This is a lemon or a lime basil that actually volunteered right over here. We had like let some basil reseed itself and I found it. It was in the path, so it was a weed. And I'm like, oh, come here, little buddy. And it's loving it right here, obviously. So, and it smells so good.
Yeah, it does.
But I'm thinking this could be a good perennial herb bed. But you know, it's just things sometimes we move hastily and we try not to because it always comes with thought. But other times we're like, yeah, let's, like I said, we're learning to slow down a lot and really just the what and the why, you know? Because you can make big mistakes pretty quickly that are hard to recover if you're not thoughtful about it.
Hold on. Here's our happy place. There's something so healing about just listening to the water. This is a nice, pretty color. Put that in a vase.
Johnson grass. Love listening to the sound of the water for sure. This is an interesting area because the water's moving fast, but this right here is a cattail. It's what's known as a macrophyte, meaning it's a large plant in a slow moving water. So even though we're actually right next to fast moving water, when you see things like duckweed or algae, cattails, there's a few like indicator plants of slow moving water. One of the things that I love about Oak Creek is the vast diversity within short geographical areas. From right here, example, even to 100 feet up. It's just like, it's different. And it's just really cool to see that, whether you're talking about the geography, like the rocks, or the flora or the fauna. I think we're a part of it in a sense. Like we harvest the mint for teas and that mix that for the composting toilet.
We have horsetail, which is medicinal, but it's also sectioned. And they fit inside of each other, and it's like a straw. You know, ancient cultures use it as a straw, and it fits like Lincoln logs. So to come down here and pick the horsetail and, you know, have kids put it together in groups of 10, engaging all of the senses, I think, is something that we all can do more. I mean, now like we're listening to the cicadas. There are times down here when we have to shout to talk because the cicadas are so loud.
I love the diversity. I don't know every single plant down here. Predominantly the grasses I know less, but look, check the minnows. Because of the flood times, a snow melt will create a reset in the creek. It creates a flash flood that offsets so much biology. It's just funny because we see annual cycles going on within a perennial stream bed. I don't know, it's just interesting to witness things like that, where you learn a lot when you are in a space like this. And I mean, there's plenty of really cool places on Oak Creek to just go and picnic and venture, and we love them all. This is growing wild here. It's cool. It's not like the celery that we stick peanut butter in, but it is celery all day. It's just really cool when food grows around you just naturally too. And of course there's other stuff you can eat. These are 3 foods we recognize and sometimes buy. This is Mentha arvensis, so that's the Latin binomial. It is field mint. My herbalist teacher says it's one of the only true mint. I do water testing with Friends of the Verde, and so I'll go to different stream bed pockets, and just 10 minutes up the stream, like that hillside that you see up there, if you were to go down to the bottom of it, the stream, just in that area is the same species of mint, but has taken on different morphogenic like properties. It smells more like spearmint, and this one more like peppermint. The diversity within just short stretches of the creek is to me always astounding. It never gets old. River. Yeah.
Hire us to tell your story. As an independent team of filmmakers, we love producing documentaries for artisans of all trades, honoring skill, passion, and determination.
The fruits of our labor literally creates happiness.
Founded in 2020, we harness our collective experience and enthusiasm for storytelling to deliver content that resonates with viewers on every level.
Think big and think outside of the box.
We avoid the constant noise of clickbait news and outrage headlines, instead crafting more intimate narratives that touch on the purpose of life itself. Stories that not only inform but also inspire, whether it's the art of agriculture, the science of fermentation, an innovative garage startup, or the intricacies of off-grid living. We're here to explore it all and invite you to join us in the discovery.
You're just working with what you have at hand instead of having unrealistic expectations.
We know the world is brimming with hidden stories waiting to be told. These are tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
The biggest thing is to realize that there's nothing that you can't do.
Embodying the American spirit that with hard work, dreams really can come true. So whether you're a garage baker, homegrown mycologist, backyard farmer, or off-grid homesteader, send us a message and share your story with the world.